Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're doing good and well. So it's time for a mini rant type video really, I guess. And I want to stress before I start my mini rant talking about issues I have with modern horror. Really, I just want to stress that actually I like a lot of modern horror. I do. I kind of, I've loved quite a few recent films that have come out. But equally, there are a lot of things that irk me with modern horror. And things that I feel like I wanted to say, I wanted to get out there. See what you all think about these things, whether you agree or disagree. It's just really for a discussion about this. Now, for me, modern horror, one of the things that for me consistently comes up at the moment are quite weak male characters. Now, this isn't to start a gender debate or a gender argument. That's not what this is about. But I do think there are weak male characters in quite a few horror films at the moment. It tends to be that men are written either, for me. And I don't think this is a problem with villains. I think villains are often written well, sort of, regardless of gender. But I find that I think good male characters, there's a lack of good, strong male characters for me in a lot of horror films at the moment. They tend to be the ones that are creepy or gaslighting their partners or just being super slow or, just being in the background even. It just feels like there is a real lack of a strong, good male character in horror movies at the moment. For me, this is an issue that I think writers and directors should think about a bit, because it's becoming very noticeable that there's just a lack of many male heroes in any of these movies at the moment. And I could probably reel off a lot of the films I've seen the past 3 years. I bet you'd find it difficult to find a good male character in those movies. So that's my first one. I think there's just not many strong. I'm sure there are people that will say, oh, what about this person? What about that person? Fair enough, you might name them in the comments, but I think it's a lot easier to name really strong female characters from the last few years than it is from, to name many strong, good male characters. And again, I'm not talking about villains. I think there's less of an issue when it comes to villains. Another thing I find frustrating is just this overload of supernatural films at the moment for me. And I do get it, right? Supernatural is a big part of horror. Ghosts and demons and exorcism and all that sort of thing. It's almost an integral part of a lot of what horror is based on. But for me, there is this over-reliance on those things at the moment. And we're getting so many supernatural movies, particularly the blockbusters and the more mainstream horror films, just keep plugging and regurgitating the same kind of supernatural based horror movies over and over again with the same sorts of jump scares. Again, this is a bit problematic for me. I think they just need to, if you're going to do a supernatural film, at the least try to find something that is remotely original about that supernatural horror film that might not have been done before. I mean, that's probably difficult to find something that might not have been done before, but at least it doesn't rely on so many tropes, so many things we've seen so many times in these kind of films. It's another one for me. For me, there are a lot of, on a similar sort of note, there are a lot of films at the moment that are very slow-paced, very psychological, but they're so slow-paced and dull that they remove sort of any want of you to invest in the film. And I feel like there's just been a lot of really slow-paced horror films lately. And sometimes I can deal with slow-paced horror films, but not when there's when I've watched recently a few horror films, they're very minimalist. They just have very little going on. Unless you've got incredibly strong characters and strong performances, they're very difficult to pull those kind of films off. It just seems there's loads of these minimalist kind of very slow of, obviously it's low budget sometimes, but not always low budget. I don't think minimalist films are necessarily always low budget, but, a lot of these really boring kind of psychological films, it's just, just a lot of those. And I don't mind those from time to time, but not at the rate they seem to be coming out at the moment. Another thing for me that I take a bit of issue with modern horror is I'm finding a lack of, and it's possibly in the age of streaming that this is less, appeals less. You don't have so many great title sequences to films anymore. I mean, what happened to the great title sequence in a lot of films, really? This is a problem across films generally, I think, is a lack of great title sequences to create the atmosphere that's needed for the movie. and really great soundtracks sometimes. I mean, I can think of some really good actually soundtracks that I've really recently enjoyed in movies. I mean, actually like Infinity Pool, Terrifier 2, It Follows has a fantastic soundtrack. That wasn't that long ago. Well, 10 years. Depends what your perspective is, but 10 years to me isn't that long ago. That has an amazing soundtrack to it. There are some modern horror films with some really cracking soundtracks, don't get me wrong, but it seems to be something that's fizzling out more and more. There's a lack of really good soundtracks in horror films. Where are they? I want them back. So that's another thing for me, as well as the lack of a really good soundtrack. I think that brings it towards the end. I think there's two things also for me, is that horror films these days, sometimes they play it too safe because they're afraid maybe of that thing that we all talk about at the moment, cancel culture. So sometimes horror films play it so safe that there's no risks involved. I think sometimes with the writing or with the characters, and I think maybe directors are a bit afraid from time to time because of the culture with online and reactions to everything so fast. And another thing for me as well is sometimes you get the opposite. You get horror movie directors that really try so hard to be really clever and different that they forget the basics of a good film with great characters and story and, you know, some logic as well. Maybe, I know horror films don't have to be super logical, right? But that's not what we tend to love the kills and that kind of thing a bit more. But I do feel like sometimes some horror directors, maybe they try and be a bit too clever or more clever than they need to be to deliver a great movie. So they get carried away with their ideas from time to time. But maybe that's slightly less of a thing for me. I do like it when people or directors try to do things a little different. So that one is less of an issue for me, maybe. But I think there's a playing it safe problem for sure, where a lot of writers and directors tend to err on the side of safety, perhaps a little more than you know, like there's a lot of these kind of, I don't know, a lot of these kind of films coming out, and again, maybe it's more of the bigger budget movies that play it very safe as well with violence and gore, and it's like, oh, come on. That's what we want to see, right, as horror fans. But don't get me wrong, you know, these are just my views and perceptions from having watched a lot of horror films in the last few years, a lot of modern horror movies. So let me know in the comments what you think of this video and what you think of these points. Do you agree with me? Do you think I've hit the nail on the head? But you know, if you don't, then that's fine. It's all good to discuss these things, and I welcome anybody else's opinions on this area, on modern horror. Let me know in the comments. Otherwise, from me, until next time, it's bye for now.